The thing is, it's very, very easy to sell athletes on the idea that something is a good session or their money's worth. No plan. And second one is no monitoring. And by no plan, I mean not just having a plan for a session. So what are we going to do today, coach? It's about having an overall idea of where are you now, where you want to be in 12 months, in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. I mean, there should be some type of long-term plan involved in everything you do. The first thing I think is responsible for your lack of growth in physical sense in rowing is that all of your sessions, or the majority of your sessions, are too intense. So sessions too intense all the time. Excuse my handwriting, it's not beautiful, but you get what I mean. Let me define what I mean by intense. Intense could be full power stroke rate 25 for the entire session. Or today we're doing 3 times 2K, stroke rate 20, all out, full power. Or today we're doing sprints. Or today. The thing is, it's very, very easy to sell athletes on the idea that something is a good session or their money's worth if the session is intense. But as a matter of fact, and you will quickly see that the opposite is true. The downside, and I've seen this so many times with athletes doing high intensity sessions all the time, are the following ones. First of all, and that's the most important for all the racing, the body loses its capacity to work in aerobic state. Now, in order to understand this, let me note that down. No or little capacity, no or little aerobic state capacity, let's put it that way. If I contract my biceps now, what happens is that ATP is turned into ADP. It's a biochemical process. The question is, how does this ATP get into the muscle? Well, first of all, of course, you have to eat, and from the things you eat, the body produces glucose, which is blood sugar. And the question is, what is the ratio between the amount of blood sugar you have available and the amount of ATP you get? And that changes drastically if you move from aerobic to anaerobic state. In aerobic state, yield is about 32 to 36 moles of ATP per mole of glucose. The moment you start to become anaerobic, the yield is only 2. And simply because the body shuts off 2 of the 3 ATP production or reproduction cycles. Now, in a rowing race, it's very important to be aerobic for at least, let's say, 40% of your race distance if we talk about 1K or 2K races. And the reason for that is simply higher energy yield. And the second reason is that your lactate tolerance, no matter how hard you practice, is not going to be infinite. So if you start out like after 10, 15, 20 strokes to be anaerobic because your body has been conditioned to be anaerobic right from the start, you essentially get into a very ineffective ATP production mode right from the start, and that's a disadvantage to everybody does have a high aerobic capacity. And secondly, you build up a lot of lactate, and that, next to the fact that you have less energy available than somebody else whose aerobic capacity is high, that lactate tolerance is not going to be endless, so you feel a lot of pain, and that does something to you physically as well as emotionally and psychologically. So there are a lot of downsides to this. In a rowing race, you will always be anaerobic at the end of a race, in most races, unless it's super high endurance or a super long distance race. So the question is, how long can you be aerobic and still be with the pack and fast? This is why I think doing 10 hard strokes within a race is counterproductive, because you build up a lot more lactate that you get speed with 10 strokes. So the drop-off of speed after 10 fast strokes within a race is more significant, in my experience, than having a consistent speed throughout the entire race. Good. The goal is to teach the body to be aerobic for a long period of time in a race and still produce high watts. And that's what takes a long time. So in training planning, there's a saying, what is gained slowly is lost slowly. What is gained quickly is lost quickly. Now, what is gained slowly are all these adaptation mechanisms of building aerobic capacity. So that takes a couple of months. What is very easy to build is high intensity stuff, so the capacity to tolerate lactate. Now, I'm well aware of all the Tabata stuff that is out there, and high intensity stuff and studies that show an increase in your anaerobic threshold level. So that's about the transition from aerobic to anaerobic if you do high intensity only. But that only works in a very, very short run. In the long run, it does not work. So if you do aerobic training in a structured way, not just one intensity level, but if you do structured aerobic training and you build your anaerobic threshold state to a very high watt level, which is possible for, even if you start to road 65, it's still possible because these mechanisms work in any age category, then your overall anaerobic threshold state in terms of watts output is much higher. To give an example, like Jakob Zwölber, one of my former athletes when he was under 23, we got him to the point that he did 2 millimole. This is like aerobic state, super low aerobic state, in a single lightweight under 23, single, 21 years old, with an average 500 meter split on the water, including turns every 2.7 kilometers, 202 average. A 202, 203, 201 average is faster than most doubles when at a much higher intensity pace. But it takes time to build this. So having no or little aerobic state capacity is one of the greatest reasons why you're not becoming faster, because lactate tolerance cannot be improved endlessly. The next big issue is that you're more prone to injuries for a very simple reason. If you never do aerobic work, not just low stuff, but also medium stuff, and that's what most people forget, then the overall turnover of the body is less. That means that your capacity to recover, to transport all the stuff away from the muscles, have a tear-down build-up process, is less. Less turnover means less work being done, means less recovery processes. If your body turnover is less, and your body immediately shifts into anaerobic state because it's conditioned to from all the frequent high intensity or mid intensity training you've done, the body never gets to that state, and it takes a long time. I have quite a few athletes who I started with, and they felt like the first month or 2-3 months of training were not exhausting at all because their perception of what was exhausting and good for the body was completely off what it should be. They simply didn't feel. So in order to teach, you can't get back into aerobic work capacity. You can do this, but it takes a couple months of training where you feel like this is not effective at all. But these are adaptation process within the cells. But you don't have these. You don't have the endorphins you simply emit when you do high intensity training, and that can be frustrating. But it's the only way to become faster in rowing if you start from having done too many intensities for most of the time. Any type of endurance load is like withdrawing money from the bank account. In terms of, is it going to hurt your joints? Any type of strength training is good for your joints. However, any type of endurance training that is structured, includes aerobic work and anaerobic work, so both of that in a well-balanced way, is good for your heart and the rest of your organism. So you need both. But if the only thing or the thing you do on a more consistent basis than anything else is high intensity work in various ways, you are very prone to injuries, and that can be back pain, that can be herniated discs, that can be muscle injuries, a lot of muscle injuries. There's a long list of possible injuries resulting from continuous high intensity training without the appropriate amount of base endurance training. Most people who are always in that high intensity area, they never dare to do true high intensity. HIT, high intensity training. With this comes not just a physiological component, but also a mentality component. With this goes the fear of not performing, and with this goes the fear of whatever I do is not enough because you always push yourself. It's got to be more and more and more. And I know there's quite a lot of so-called motivational videos on YouTube or on all TikTok, name all the platforms, that you have to work hard, you have to do more, it is never enough. All the winners push themselves harder all the time. But these are pretty unreflected statements. They usually don't hold true. That's my experience. Everything in life consists of waves. If you look at the sea, there's waves up and down, up and down. There's day and night, there are the seasons. So it seemed to me, it may sound philosophical to you right now. I forgot to hit the record button, so now the audio should be better. This may sound philosophical to you right now, but everything you do on this planet Earth is subject to ups and downs. There is no consistent up. The only thing that grows on a consistent basis is a cancer cell, and you don't want that. So you have to anticipate that. And there's nobody who's successful all the time. There's nobody who's happy all the time. And there's nobody who's doing true high intensity all the time. And with that goes the fact that most people who do this quote-unquote targeted high intensity all the time, in fact, they never do true high intensity. And I see this with my athletes. The way we structure the year is that the early parts of the season, so Northern Hemispheres would be start like October, we do a lot of low endurance, a lot of strength, and then we slowly work into the high intensity area the closer we get to peak of season. And then we do true high intensity. But true high intensity is a total lack of ability to perform any further and still push yourself. So you work essentially in failure state. And a lot of my athletes were not able to do this in the first instance. And I see this with a lot of new athletes who come on board frequently. That is because there's always that pressure, what if I don't perform? What if it is not enough? What if I give my best and it's not sufficient? But a true high intensity training is exactly that. But the problem is, most of you out there have the intention of doing high intensity all the time. There's a lack of capacity of actually doing true high intensity work because you're simply afraid to be insufficient, inadequate for the sport, or not motivated enough. And if you can't give your best all the time, maybe this is not the right sport for you, nonsense like this. All you collegiate athletes or high school athletes, how many silly 2K tests have you do per year? And that's not effective. It's counterproductive to physical development to do tests. I mean, if you have to do the tests to stay on the team, be it. But I recommend not to do these tests. It's especially early season. There's nothing funnier than starting a season, a new training year, with a 2K intro test. Absolutely a waste of time, because athletes are afraid, what if I don't perform? So they take it easy during the training before, or try to hide that they're taking it easy, and then they have to recover from the test afterwards. If you train base endurance, aerobic capacity, you're not going to improve over a 2K. Or if you improve, it's only by accident for parameters outside of your means of influence. Maybe a better day or whatever it was. So testing these things is not productive. I know it's common practice, but it doesn't make it any better. Just because we've always done things that way, it doesn't make the old things better. And this is one of these things. And there's clear scientific reasoning behind this. Next point. There's a lack of recovery capacity between high-intensity sessions and races. And I see this when people do races and they try to, if they're not in the lead, they try to take it easy because they have to save energy for the next race. It shouldn't be the case. If your training plan is accurately scheduled out and adapted to your current state of development, this is what I mean with no monitoring. So if it's monitored, your development, and the plan is adapted, then you should be able to do 3 races per day without any loss of energy, or no significant loss of energy. I remember when I worked with the Plunkett twins on that Zimbabwean double, that was the first Zimbabwean junior double ever to reach an A final, and the first ever, and it has never been achieved afterwards. When we started to work, we only had 5-6 months to bring him from C final, junior world level, to A final. They were afraid that they couldn't do more than 2-3 races per day. And ultimately, during the last high intensity weeks, with all the build-up work we did, they were able to do the equivalent of 8 to 10 races within a week, sometimes 16 races in a week, without being burned out or stressed out or anything. But you need to build this recovery capacity up with a high aerobic capacity. So the goal is to pull a lot of watts while still being aerobic in aerobic state. And that also leads to the point that you have less injuries and that you have higher capacity to recover from high intensity sessions. So if you're never prepared to do high intensity sessions, there is no use doing these. Okay, next point. I see this with some of high performance athletes, lack of quality of sleep. I'm not going to put this on the list here because it's more a rare thing. Mostly happens to national teams when the body still needs time to recover during the night. And that's a massive warning sign. And because of a self-protection mode, people hover around ultimately about in that mid-intensity area because nobody humanly can do high performance and high intensity training every single session, and even if it's just 4 sessions per week. Because of a lack of recovery capacity, one off day will not get the job done, especially if you're an endurance athlete. You need the turnover more than an explosive athlete. There's also an experience I made. The other group would be that sessions are not intense enough. I see this especially in Europe, that a lot of masters athletes love to hover around a stroke rate 18 to 22. It's a comfortable stroke rate, especially 2022. A lot of technique deficiencies can be well hidden in these stroke rates because the boat's moving anyway. So they never really go above that 2022 stroke rate area. The one extreme high intensity all the time, especially North America, Australia, but yeah, also Europe actually. No, it's globally, it's a global phenomenon. The other extreme is then these long 16, 18, 20 kilometer sessions every day with low intensity. There is also no physical development taking place. It is certainly healthier than the high intensity stuff all the time, but in order to perform in a rowing race where you need both, it's not sufficient. Next, there are a couple of more lacks why you're probably not getting faster in the rowing. A lack of core, and especially asymmetric core. I've put out a video about asymmetric core training. You can essentially follow along. I put this out for free. This is what I do a lot with my team, not exclusively, but this is a major component. If you do asymmetric core strength, and a lot of people neglect it because it's not rowing, but your max power output increases if you strengthen the transferal muscle groups. So being able to transfer force from the left hand to the right foot actually increases your overall power output because you connect the muscles. There are way more things to that than just this fact, but that's probably the most important fact I just like to call up here. Yeah, a lot of people have a lack of dedicated strength and weight training that is beneficial. I'm not going to put this on the list. May not be true for everybody, but weight training is either done too much or not at all. There's usually no balance, and if it's included in the training, it's like another hard session. It's never included in the plan as it should be. That a weight training is a complementary session to the current point of development of endurance and endurance capacity, aerobic and anaerobic, throughout the entire year. And that's probably the most important thing. A lack of structure. I'm going to put this up right here because a lack of structure is, I have to highlight this. A lack of structure, the problem with this is if you don't know where you're going with your training, it's like a randomized following whatever is good for today or what the coach says for today. But if you want to develop, you need a goal, you need a system, plan and structure. So by this I mean, if we look at the training years, a training year is usually separated into mesocycles of 3 to 6 weeks. And you start out with base endurance strength and you have faster body angle speeds throughout the entire year. A body angle speed is the speed with which you're moving. You would know from day one of a 12-month training year where you want to be in 10 months from now and how you get there. And it is very likely, if you do it properly, there's not going to be any high intensities on the plan for the first 3 months or 4 months. Because this is contradictory to aerobic capacity development. What I see is that a lot of athletes simply don't have the structure of a build-up phase. There are no dedicated load phases. It's like a load all the time. And also with the trust that a load is actually designed to make you fail and that it's okay to fail. Because if you don't learn to fail during training, failing is a hard process. Because in school, we learn not to fail, which is silly. In fact, you should always learn how to fail first before you learn how to succeed. Success is a series of failures until it happens. And nobody likes to be successful in the first attempt all the time. That's boring. This is how we're wired. I think this is why we're here on Earth. We're here on Earth to learn how to overcome obstacles, because if there are no obstacles, you make obstacles to feel the strength you have within and to feel the development capacity you have within. In next to no load phases, there are certainly no recovery phases. And the idea of development is to have performance build up and scheduled performance duration, but not to the same level. Build up again, down again, up again, da-da-da. And what you see is an overall line of improvement. That's what looks linear, but there is no linear development going on. And another major thing why you're not getting faster is there are way too many peaks. Just recently, one of my junior athletes said, hey, I've got this test coming up. It's a 2K test and a 5K test. And I say, if you can't skip it, it won't break your leg, but it's not. Yeah, but I want to prepare for this 2 days before. You can't prepare for a test 2 days before. Preparation happens over a couple of weeks and months. You get into a state where you simply can't pull off tests. My under 23 athletes, they always had to perform tests for the federation. It was silly. Eventually, they were so fast that they could do the 5Ks and mostly the 2Ks as well with a part of their aerobic states. We would just do 7.5, 7 minutes, 6.5 minute piece, whatever, with about 5 millimole. And then it would continue the same pace for another 15 minutes, where all the others were about going equal pace, but they couldn't do this another 15 minutes. It sounds arrogant, but this is exactly what happened. Too many peaks kind of deteriorate your season, so you need time to build the season. There can be more races, so if you build, let's say from October, hey, there were a couple cool races I want to join, and one is in January, one is in March, and I'd love to do indoor sprints. So it's all right, you can do this. But don't expect to be at your absolute annual best. There's only one annual best. With my high-performance athletes in the national teams, I usually do it that way, that if the qualification is so essential that you can't get to your main peak of season, we target the qualification as the main peak, go into recovery phase and peak once more. So I would say up to 2 peaks or 3 serious peaks per season are realistic. Sometimes you want to prepare along the way, that's possible as well. There always has to be 1 or 2 main peaks of the year, and the rest is kind of priority B. These are the reasons why you're probably not getting faster in rowing. I'm going to recap that real quick. How to become faster. Every session has a target. A good session is a session if you hit the target and doesn't need to be high intensity. The target of a session is determined by your current point of the season. So you have to have a structure, know where you are. And if that's the case, you start to develop. Now, the last 2 sentences may sound like, duh, it's obvious. No, there's a lot of thinking behind this, and everybody on my team knows that. I hope this video was helpful. I'm very, very curious about the comments. I know it's not the overall sensational video, but I think these are some of the core and key factors why juniors, under 23, Olympic masters, and so on, late starters, are not developing and how this can be changed. If you want to work with us, of course, we provide that plan and structure, but there are other coaches as well who do this. So I recommend you get a coach who does that well. If you want to work with us, our email address is info@armtraining.com. If you want to grow and develop, get structure into your plan. That's the most important thing. I'm looking forward to your comments, and I'm looking forward to see more of you subscribing to the channel, because the more subscribers I have, this is how the algorithm works, the more people I can help, because I can spend more time making these videos. All the best. Contact us, info@armtraining.com. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye-bye.